It's been nearly a week since Trump supporters stormed the Capitol, and the House of Representatives is wasting no time deciding if President Trump will be impeached for a second time. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says the House will proceed with plans to impeach President Trump, citing Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. This allows Congress to bar public officials who took an oath of allegiance and then engaged in insurrection or rebellion. Democrats accuse President Trump of inciting insurrection moments before a mob of Trump-supporting rioters took over the Capitol building. 6 people, including 2 Capitol police officers, died following the siege. I want to bring in my guest, Michael Waldman. He is the president of New York University Law School's Brennan Center for Justice. Michael, welcome. It's great to have you with us. Can you break down for us the presidential power of pardoning, and let us know if President Trump can, in fact, pardon himself?
Well, the power to pardon is one of the most significant powers given to a president. It comes from the King of England. It's in the Constitution, and it is used sparingly. No president has ever pardoned themselves. Can a president pardon himself or herself? The Justice Department in 1974 said, no way. That would mean that there would be no accountability, that the president would be the judge in his own case. But it's never happened. No one's ever had the thought that it could happen. And so the courts have not ruled. So it's in that sense unclear. But if you think about it, in the Constitution, they say, well, presidents can be impeached, and there's a general view that you can't prosecute a president while he's in office. Well, if a president can just pardon himself, then that literally means that a president is above the law. And that was what we fought the revolution of 1776 against.
Absolutely. It's interesting, your writings on presidential pardon, because you do make the case that when it's used well, it's actually a valuable tool to, show mercy and to, there are so many cases of our jails overfilled with, especially we've seen recently with the racial injustices that happen that lead to, more African-American men being incarcerated for certain crimes. And you could see how it could be used very valuably in certain situations. This president, however, has used it to pardon members of people who worked for him. Has that happened before?
Well, people who worked for him and who were convicted of lying on his behalf in scandals. That has happened before, truthfully, in bits and pieces, but not without accountability. One of the articles of impeachment against Richard Nixon in Watergate said that he dangled clemency, as it was called, pardons in front of the Watergate burglars to keep them silent. Yes, it's in the Constitution, but the rule of law has to apply here as well. Bill Clinton, who I worked for, had some controversial pardons at the end, and one of them was investigated by prosecutors. They didn't bring charges. He was cleared, but nevertheless, people understood that it could be part of the rule of law. We've never had anything like this in our country's history, where the president of the United States is instigating insurrection and sent a mob down to the Capitol to stop the counting of the people's votes in a presidential election. We can't let the pardon become one more unprecedented way of attacking our Constitution, I believe.
And so do you think the president is aware of the legal jeopardy he is in, and this is why he's floating the idea, or reportedly floating the idea, of pardoning himself? If he does attempt to pardon himself before he leaves office, how would that impact the investigations involving him on a state level, such as the one that's underway in New York right now?
Well, all news accounts suggest that he's very worried about criminal liability, as he frankly should be. Even before what he did this past week, there were very serious investigations upheld by the Supreme Court of the United States in criminal proceedings in New York and elsewhere You're correct that a pardon under the Constitution only would apply to federal crimes. Well, we know that there's a New York grand jury looking at financial potential improprieties being run by the district attorney of Manhattan. And we know that when the president, and it's crazy to think it was just a little over a week ago, when he called the Secretary of State of Georgia and asked him to, quote, find enough votes for him to win, or he would face criminal prosecution himself, we know that there is a state criminal investigation of Donald Trump for his seemingly quite criminal conduct there. And so none of those would be affected by a pardon, whether by him or by Mike Pence or anyone else. Those are all under state law.
So could we potentially see a scenario like we did when President Nixon resigned and then in turn President Ford pardoned him? Is there any future scenario where we could see President Biden pardoning President Trump out of some effort to, bring together a divided country? You could argue whether that's a misguided effort, but that has been floated.
It's a great question, and it's pretty unlikely. For all the reasons that everybody can imagine. What happened in 1974 is that Richard Nixon's vice president, Gerald Ford, became president when Nixon resigned, and people thought, gee, maybe there was a deal. It doesn't seem like there was a deal at the time, but that Ford thought he was going to be putting the country's troubles behind it. In fact, it probably cost him re-election for the presidency, even if it was well-intended. In Ford's case, I think that Biden would not and is highly unlikely to just say, oh, let's let bygones be bygones. There's a new team coming into the Justice Department. We know there are considerable numbers of criminal investigations going on around this attack on democracy and this insurrection that occurred. We know there's still warnings by the FBI of armed mobs encouraged by Trump today, basically, who are still threatening our democracy. I think it would be pretty unlikely if everybody just said, oh, let's let bygones be bygones. You need to have some accountability and some truth and justice before there's healing and moving on.
Well, Michael Waldman, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you. My pleasure.